Let's speak to Jonathan Davis, economist and wealth manager. Good morning, Jonathan.
Hello, Kaye.
Good morning. Do you understand where Jojo and Leslie are coming from here? You know, they've got 9 children between them, not together. Christmas is just such a massive juggernaut within our lives. It just kicks in. Kids have expectations. Leslie particularly enjoys the family side of it, getting together, everyone coming together. Maybe this is one time that it is worth getting into a bit of debt.
There are pros and cons. No doubt everything you say there is perfectly valid, and partly this is the real world, and as one of the ladies said, how can you explain to a very young child that there isn't going to be Christmas, that mum's going to be Grinch that year? When they go to playgroup or to school, if they're that age, everyone's going to be talking about what happened at Christmas and so on. The reality, though, is that it is the real world. And, bringing the big picture economics to it, the politicians of all creeds have decided for decades that we should have higher and higher costs of living. Remember, we didn't have money in the 1950s, but we were still very happy. And indeed, you could bring up a family on just one salary, whereas now it takes 2 salaries and debt. Yeah. And we're not particularly happy.
Yeah, I know. I guess what we really want to focus on in this discussion is what does the individual do about Christmas? I mean, taking on board all of those extra factors. For you as an individual, will you continue to spend at Christmas? Will you go into debt this Christmas? Do you think it's worth it? 0500 92 95 00. Let's speak again to Jonathan Davis, economist and wealth manager. I mean, Jonathan, just before the news, you were saying that the pressures on families are greater, disposable income is not as great. So there's that whole macroeconomic picture, if you like. But let's focus on the individual. What should individuals do? Because as Jojo and Leslie have eloquently explained, the pressure is phenomenal and the desire is phenomenal.
They should cut their cloth according to their wherewithal. Look, the government of whichever government it is will bail out the bankers. They'll not bail out us people. In other words, we need to be smarter. We need to reduce our costs of living. For Christmas, there's lots of ways you can reduce the cost of living. One of the ladies before said they went to Cyprus as an alternative. Well, sorry, that's not cutting the cost of living. Have you heard of a thing called eBay, which sells things for 99 pence? Have you heard of charity shops? Have you heard of buying things through the year that you see on sale and you hide them in a little cubby hole somewhere in the house that the kids can't find them? There's lots of ways of cutting the cost of Christmas.
Well, I don't know. Let's ask the ladies if they've heard of those things. Ladies?
It was cheaper to go to Cyprus because we booked it so far in advance, and it was cheaper to go to Cyprus than to spend Christmas here. And that suggestion of buying things on eBay, you try giving a 7-year-old a second-hand present and see
I have,
like
and I do, and they're perfectly happy as it happens. It's what you train them. If you train them they have to have the brand names.
Don't be ridiculous. It's the amount of advertising. That's exactly the reason I went to Cyprus. We didn't have any presents. I wanted to get back to just spending time with the family and not having any of the nonsense of Christmas presents and ridiculous amounts of money spent. And I wanted to get back to just spending time. We spent the day on the beach and we had a picnic and it was absolutely beautiful, and it was much more about Christmas than what is absolutely rammed down your throat in this country, but also, and in lots of countries, but also when the kids went back to school, they felt incredibly, people were really kind of, you didn't have presents, it's a lot. It's actually the way other people bring up the children, I think, that appalls me, that there is such pressure put on people.
I mean, Jojo, the word pressure comes up a lot, and Leslie's used it as well. You mentioned advertising. Is that where you see the major pressure coming from?
Well, for everybody to get so absolutely ridiculously excited about an advert for a shop is, do you know what I mean? The amount, the John Lewis advert, can't believe, really, that's our sort of ding, 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 Christmas has started.
Well, I mean, Jonathan, are you just impermeable?
No, we celebrate Christmas. We do the whole thing. We have a Christmas tree that we've brought out for the last 10 years, the same one. And yes, we do steer clear of the brand names. We do give some of the things that we give to our small kids are second-hand. And yes, if unfortunately, too many families have got into this cycle of, our kids must have the newest, our kids must have the best, it must be the brand names, it must be what they've seen advertised on the telly. No, it doesn't have to be.
No, it doesn't have to be, but if you have absolutely no money, like so many people have, Christmas, you can't avoid Christmas, and even doing it the cheapest possible way, essentially, it's simple arithmetic. If you've got nothing to start with and you have to negotiate Christmas, you have to get the money from somewhere. Do you mean you can't just ignore Christmas?
Yeah.
It's just,
Okay, well, let's get some other thoughts on this. We've got two very different views here. Jonathan basically saying you just have to cut your cloth, and there are a whole variety of ways in which you can minimise the costs of Christmas. Second-hand presents would be one of them, he says. Not buying brand names, doing it slowly over the year and putting things away in a little cubby hole. Is that the approach that we should all be adopting or not? 0500 92 95 00. How realistic is that, do you think? We've got Mel who's in Dollar. Hi, Mel.
Oh, hi, Kaye. Good morning.
Good morning. How do you approach Christmas?
Well, I mean, we've had Christmases with money and we've had Christmases without money, and I think really this business of children and having to give them everything, it's up to the parent really to decide how they're going to put that to their kids. I mean, our kids have never expected the world. They've always had huge wish lists, obviously, as all children do. But it's up to the parents to sort of make it more realistic to them all. Obviously, they're not going to have this, they're not going to have that. And Christmases where we had no money, we made things. We made going back some time, cassette tapes for parents. We made sweets for other people. And was it Chris was saying about giving second-hand gifts?
Yeah.
We've had books that haven't been read that people have really enjoyed to get, and all sorts of things. And I just feel that, everyone wants to blame someone else about Christmas, and it's not the case. You have to
So you do have to cut your cloth?
I think you do, and I think, we all want to give the best to our children. Everybody does, there's no doubt about that, but it doesn't have to be new, shiny toys. And the people we need to blame about Christmas is not having money. It's the retailers and the adverts and everything like that, where the children are glued to the box and they're watching these things, and it's up to us to deal with that. We can't put the blame on everyone else all the time. We have to take some...
You've obviously managed to resist it. Would you ever get into debt for Christmas, Mel?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, what is the point that, it is so difficult these days. Everything costs money, and I do appreciate that. And, you just have to be sensible. Christmas is one day of the year, and the most important thing about Christmas is being together with your family, the ones that you love, and enjoying the moment. And actually, people get so tied up with Christmas and presents and gifts that they forget what it's actually all about.
Well, I mean, very different views, and it's we don't want to start judging people this morning, but everyone is coming from a different place in this, and I'd really appreciate your calls, because it is such a massive event within most people's lives in Scotland, not everybody's lives, and we have to culturally absolutely acknowledge that. But for most people in Scotland, it is a major event, which is very difficult to ignore, as Jojo says. But how do you actually manage it? Can you just cut your cloth and be, very sort of pragmatic about it? Jen in Aberdeen says, our family's grown up, but when they wrote their Santa letters, we told them that Santa may not have some of the asks on the list. If a lot of kiddies ask for the same thing, let's face it, life is full of disappointments, and our children have to learn to cope, and they expect they can have it all. Interesting that Jen says her children are grown up now, because I do wonder if this pressure has increased as years have gone by, and whether or not you see that as any kind of, if not excuse, mitigation. And Noreen Stevenson says it's because of the irresponsibility of the likes of the woman you had on, who has not learned after 2 years that getting into debt over Christmas is one of the reasons the country's got into the mess it's in. No doubt she'll be getting to the stage where she'll be applying for benefits, and the rest of us will play for her irresponsibility. What kind of example is she setting for her children? They are learning that getting into debt is fine. Mummy did it. That's a fairly harsh line to Jojo and Leslie. Let's just say we don't know about your personal circumstances, and we're not necessarily going to make you account for them. But let's speak to Yvonne McDermott, who's the Chief Executive of Money Advice Scotland. Good morning, Yvonne.
Good morning, Kaye.
Good morning. Is this clear message that should go out here? Cut your cloth. Do not get into debt for Christmas. See what you've got, and if you don't have enough, then go to charity shops, buy second-hand presents. Don't buy brand names. Basically, spend what you can, but not a penny more.
Well, I think it's actually a lot more complex than that, because there are people out there, as we know, and one of the callers there did mention about not having money. There are people that actually suffer the whole year through. That our members see, and
I do appreciate that, Yvonne,
yeah.
and we will go into it, but these figures that are out from the Money Advice Service, and you're of course Money Advice Scotland, say that nearly more than a third of people are going into 2014 in debt. So we are not just talking about the people who are living kind of hand to mouth week on week.
No, that's absolutely true, because you have to remember that right across the piece you have people in society who have got different levels of debt, but we've also got quite a lot of people, as you'll know, who are reliant now on food banks, and they won't be sitting with the pile of stuff that you get on the eBay, etc. They just are living literally hand to mouth, and it's not because that they don't want to work, or it could be ill health, it could be a whole raft of things. I think it's a very complex argument, and I think you've covered quite a lot of the things that perhaps some people would be prepared to do. But I do think, and it goes back to the point that was mentioned earlier, advertising. Now, advertising is sometimes quite subliminal, and it's quite difficult for people, albeit the parent is the one in charge, difficult sometimes for parents to actually say no, and it might just be to one thing, because they may not have any kind of disposable income that we were talking about earlier. So I think it's very, very difficult for people, and we need to not let's be too judgmental, and of course there is this whole element of personal responsibility that's really important, but that's all fine and dandy if you've got money. If you don't have money and you're expecting then to try and give your children a happy Christmas when you've been reliant on food banks, I think all of us would be challenged actually to deliver something there.
Yeah, well, I mean, Jonathan, would you accept that we have to, make distinctions here between people who are genuinely struggling to pay out just the normal expenses of life, or the necessary expenses of life, and then you put Christmas on top, that it makes it virtually impossible for them not to go into some level of debt, as versus people who push the boat out, as it were?
Okay, we live in the Simon Cowell world where you can be 17-year-old and suddenly you get £1 million contract for singing or whatever. In other words, it'll be all right. Whatever happens, we'll be okay. Well, the fact is, this isn't the Simon Cowell world. In the ancient Rome, they called it the bread and circuses. Give them bread and circuses. Marie Antoinette said, let them eat cake. The fact is, millions of households in the UK are struggling or underwater. I couldn't agree more. The point I'm trying to make is, if you're struggling, the last thing you should do is make it even more difficult for yourself. Don't go to a payday lender. Don't take out more debt, because it ain't going to get any better unless you win the lottery, and we know the chances of that.
But Jonathan, you're essentially saying to people who are in a very cash-strapped situation, and even some people who are maybe not quite so tight, just don't do Christmas. That's what you're saying. No,
I'm not. I'm saying plan for it. Look, you've got 12 months from the 1st of January to plan for it. There are lots of things you can do. I reiterate, you can buy cheap items through the year and hide it in a cubbyhole. You've got to plan. Do not get into further debt, because I tell you, the end result of that, I'm afraid to say, is pretty obviously bankruptcy, and then that's it. You're in penury for the rest of your life. Okay. Would you rather not have slight difficulty for a year or penury for the whole of your life?